Hello, welcome. I'm Shawna with the Astro Psyche, and this is episode 5 of the Astro Psyche podcast. And I wanted to share with you some thoughts that I have on psychological containment and feelings of the wild from a psychological standpoint, and how these concepts correlate to the moon and Saturn in astrology. And this is based on an assignment that I had in my MA in Counseling Psychology program last month. And I wanted to, it was a very brief assignment, and I wanted to um, sort of unpack the astrological correlations to this idea of psychological containment that I didn't have the space to fully explore in that particular assignment. So um, I am gonna look at my notes here, and I am recording this live. So if you're watching live, let me know that you can hear me, maybe where you're tuning in from, and any thoughts or questions that you have as I'm sharing here, or if you're watching the recording as well or listening to the recording. So when I'm talking about psychological containment, the context of this is this feeling of being held, this feeling of safety and security. And I really feel that this is related to both the moon and Saturn in different kind of ways. So this particular context is also coming from an environmental psychology course. So that was kind of like the frame with which we are assigned this idea. So for this particular project, I connected with a physical place, a physical environment. That was a part of the process to connect with a physical place. Um, I live in San Diego, and so I connected with the beach as a place of both psychological containment and an experience of the wild. And so initially, I observed the waves and the ocean, the constantly shifting sand as a representation of the wild, because of the spontaneous and uncontained nature of the ocean, of the waves, of the sand. Um, and for any of you that have ever been to the ocean for maybe a couple of hours, you've seen how things can change very quickly, even over the course of a couple of hours. The tide can come in, the tide can come out. And this is like the tides are literally connected to the moon, to the cycles of the moon. And so this concept of the wild uh, is connected to the moon in that um, in astrology, we see the moon as a symbol of emotions, of intuition, of subjective perception, our personal internal experience. And the moon is also a symbol of cycles and rhythms. And that can be external, like the waves, like the tides. It can also be internal. And I think that we often, I know myself, I've been thinking about this a lot, about psychological cycles, and how um, my my output, my creative energy, especially in a graduate program, is very cyclical. And I think that we have become very disconnected from that. I know at least I feel very disconnected from that when, we have to work and earn money and go through school, and we have to take care of family members, um, children, parents, extended family, etc. So there's um, there's this natural internal cycle of um, we could even think of it as extroversion and then introversion, or doing and then replenishing. doing and then not doing. Although I think doing and not doing is kind of misleading, because when when you're not doing something, like when you're physically not taking action, you are likely still doing something on the inside, and that is worthy and valid. And so this is all moon stuff, this like cycle where for example, I've been writing my master's thesis, and that is a lot of psychological heavy lifting and concentration. And so I've noticed that I'll go through these cycles where I will write ferociously for several days, and then after that, I can't think. um, I mean, I can think, but I have kind of like um, this need to not do physical activity or to not do a creative output. There's like a resting period, so to speak. And so this cyclical kind of theme is very much connected to the moon, and I feel it's very connected to the wild, because when we think of the wild, we typically think of like chaotic, um, and that may, I think that is accurate, and there's a lot of cycle and repetition and spiraling that's connected to nature, to the wild, ourselves included, that I think that we forget about. um, the other piece that I wanted to say about this as well is that um, for this particular project, I noticed that I had been drawn to the beach, to the ocean, particularly at times of either sunset or sunrise, more sunset, during the twilight hours. And in Celtic mythology, these are times and places where that are considered portals to the other world, um, which is very wild in Celtic mythology. And so Celtic mythology considers twilight to be a portal time. It considers, so sunset, twilight. It also considers any place where the water and the earth meet to be a portal place. So that could be the ocean. It could also be a stream or a well, anywhere where there's that meeting of earth and water, um, that transition place where there's a border or a boundary. There's this transitory kind of um, tone to the physical place that's also a portal. And Celtic mythology sees these portals as as a transition from our physical material world, the land of human life, the land of nature, into the other world, which would be the world of spirit or ancestors or the fae or the fairy folk. And in Celtic mythology, the other world is quite wild. And so I thought it was really interesting that there's this theme around the wild, and then also that the moon is connected to our early holding environment, but also to our ancestry and to either our genetic ancestry, our family of origin history, and then our subjective experience of our early holding environment. So our experience of our caregivers, our experience of our childhood, of our formative years, and that there's like this connection to the wild, to where we come from, and to our patterning, um, to our generational patterning that we're not even aware of. And this is where our intuition resides. Um, Intuition is not rational. Intuition is not something that makes logical sense that we can usually connect the dots on. It typically um, comes from a place that intuition typically comes from a place of not controlling. And I think that's really important because we're so conditioned to, um, and I'm speaking from my own experience as well, that um, we're very conditioned to value control and purpose and execution when a core part of our essence, the moon, is all about intuition and having no control over when and how that arises. Now, we can certainly do things to cultivate our intuition, to channel it, and to learn how our intuition um, speaks to us and through us. But it's not something that you can sit down and say, okay, I'm going to, my intuition is going to come out in this particular way. Um, I think intuition is more wild and relational in that way. We need to build a relationship with it. And so I hope that this is making sense. I realize that the way that I'm talking about this is a bit kind of like in a spiral sort of pattern. So I hope that you're still with me. Um, I wanted to just really express this concept of the moon as an embodiment of the wild, and that the wild um, is not necessarily chaotic, that there are themes and there are cycles and there are patterns. And so, what about psychological containment? That's the other piece of this that I wanted to bring in. That was another piece of this conversation. So, um, for this project, I wrote in identifying this space of the wild at the seaside, I simultaneously experienced psychological containment while traveling up and down the concrete boardwalk. There's a boardwalk at the beach that I go to. In a mundane sense, the walls of the boardwalk provide protection from high tides and a convenient boundary between ocean, wilderness, wildness, and common civilization. And so um, I want to share here that a part of my inspiration for choosing this particular place as a representation of psychological containment is because I realized that I've felt very psychologically contained by going to the boardwalk. So, some of you know that this spring, in I think it was like April of 2022, I started roller skating, and I've been roller skating up and down the boardwalk, and it is so much fun. And not only is it so much fun, but I feel like it combines kind of, especially skating in this location on the boardwalk, it combines this feeling of wildness because there's this freedom and this flow that happens. And there's also this containment because I'm not skating like in a parking lot, I'm not skating in a rink. Although I think a rink could be seen as psychological containment as well. But there is this sort of like channel. And so I have this pathway that I go up and down, and I have this experience of the wild, but then also there is this boundary that is containing me. And this is very Saturnian, this boundary. Um, and Saturn can be containing, psychologically containing. It can also be constricting if that boundary or that border starts to feel too constricted or too heavy, etc. And so I'll touch on that more in a moment. Um, but I want to share this because I think a big part of this psychological containment for me was during this process throughout spring and summer. And even this fall, I've been researching and writing my master's thesis. And so I would, spend most of my day writing or thinking or reading or researching. And then I would go skate. And I didn't do this consciously, but I think unconsciously I was really craving this kind of place or function or action to process um, all of the things and ideas and thoughts. Uh, to process all of that in a more physical way, in a way that felt free yet contained at the same time. And so Saturn is like the essence of containment, and Saturn is about boundaries and borders and um, physical, psychological limitation. Saturn tells us where things begin, where things end, where our limitations are. Uh, Saturn really tells us how much we can change and not change. I'm also thinking of the Saturn always makes me think of the Serenity Prayer. It goes something like asking for God, Goddess, Spirit, etc., to give you the courage to change the things that you can change, the humbleness to accept the things that you cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference. And to me, this is very Saturnian because Saturn gives us this opportunity to identify where we have our power, our authority, our autonomy, and then where we need to work within the limitations that are presented to us. And sometimes it can be really tricky to figure this out. And in fact, most people that come to me for astrology sessions are experiencing a Saturn transit of some sort because Saturn symbolizes these really challenging situations, and it can be sometimes kind of overwhelming to figure out where it's like, okay, this isn't working, and so I need to make a change, or I need to go a different direction, or surrender to something, or where is there a loss of power in your life right now, and that you actually have the power that you need, or the resources. Saturn is also resources, the resources that you need in order to make a change. And I think that working with Saturn in this way is very invaluable. So I also want to say that Saturn is containment from our caregivers. So there's this connection with Moon and Saturn, both to our early holding environment, to our early childhood environment. From when you're born to, let's say, 3 to 5 years old, when your psyche is really developing, your personal subconscious is developing through your environment, through the meeting of your temperament, your nature, and your environment, the nurture part. This is like very Moon Saturn stuff. And so this is why in astrology, the moon was traditionally associated with the mother And then Saturn was oftentimes associated with the father. Now, things are much different in our current contemporary culture. So there's kind of like this blending. And I think that, that can hold true, but we really need to look at the chart in more detail to suss out, because um, I find it's more helpful to think less about the traditional mother or father figure and to look at a person's. Uh, that's why I keep using the word holding environment, because your holding environment is your experience of your caregivers and your childhood, and this is also very connected to the way that you relate to people in adulthood. So we would call that attachment styles, how you give and receive love. And so Saturn is very connected to this, because whereas the moon is more about your subjective needs and wants and desires and experiences, Saturn is more about how you were contained psychologically and held. Um, Saturn is also a symbol of how you experience power and authority and autonomy in yourself and in your relation to the outside world. And so, again, Saturn, I think that we have this negative view of Saturn because it can manifest in a way where it's too much. Um, but I think that um, it was so. I just found it very interesting that I really needed this particular kind of psychological containment while I was doing something that was very Saturn-like, writing any kind of like um, intensive writing process. Has this kind of Saturnian tone to it. It's a master's thesis is a long-term project. It requires um, a great deal of focus and dedication and commitment. So it's very Saturn-like, and so I think that what was really cool about this is as I was experiencing myself a Saturn transit, I was having that Saturn energy manifest synchronistically through writing the thesis, and then also using Saturn in a different kind of way too, through this experience of like being free and feeling this experience of the wild through roller skating, but then also having that containment as well, even in that more free flowing kind of state. And so I'm sharing this because I want us to be thinking about how we relate to experiences of the wild and cycles, and how we feel psychologically contained. And that's going to change um, over time based on what's happening in your life. And it's also going to change based on the transits that you're having. It's going to be different based on your temperament and how your temperament meets or matches or connects with the environment that you're in. And yeah, I think that also we think of Saturn as very static and very set and fixed, and as boundaries is very fixed. And I think what is very helpful is to think about Saturn and containment as flexible, as changeable, as moldable. I'm thinking of Plato right now. So Plato, um, I think I'm thinking about that because I used Plato often when I was doing counseling. In my practicum site, we would use Plato to sort of like work out feelings or express. And Plato is moldable; it'll stay where it is, but you can constantly change it and massage it. And so I like thinking of Saturn as Plato, and that we can change it. Now, there are certain things that we cannot change, but it's up to us to figure out how we can mold our situation, how we cannot mold our situation, and then um, how it's possible for us to stay flexible in an inner state, like that inner flexibility. And I think I wanted to share this today also because I'm I'm rounding out the uh, the completion of my thesis, um, and I think that there's a need for containment even in that, and um, what do I want to say here? There's a need for containment from beginning to end, and then also like an honoring of the process too. And I think that um, me sharing this with you is a way for me to honor this process and to create. I'm like, keep imagining a bubble, like a little soap bubble around this process of my thesis. And I think that transitions are important, beginnings and endings. And I think that it's so important to honor these and to like hold ourselves sort of at that threshold. And there's so much that I'm excited for and that I want to share with you um, from my thesis as well. The other part that I wanted to touch on is that the topic of my thesis is uh, correlations between the depth psychotherapist and mythic figures who guide souls after death. Mythic figures who guide souls after death are also called psychopomps. And so the psychopomp also has this very like transitional kind of tone and symbolism to it. And I feel that I've learned so much from researching this, and that there's so much more that I want to say too outside of my thesis, but I'm also feeling like a need and a desire to contain this particular phase of the process. Um, and so I wonder, yeah, I wonder how that lands with you, what comes up for you as you think about psychological containment in your life where you're at right now. I've talked a bit about Saturn and how that can um, manifest in challenging ways in our chart. And so, along with that, I also want to offer that or note that I do offer astrology sessions. I've just revised my website too so that it's a little bit more clear on the type of work that I'm offering, and that there are two ways of working with me at this point in time. So you can get an astrology session with me, and then I'm also offering divinations where I you have a question, like a specific question, and then I do a divination, whether that's tarot or astrology or another oracle, and send you like a recording, video or audio of my interpretation of the answer. And so I wanted to share that with you also in case that's something that you were interested in. Um, I always love connecting with you in this way. I hope that you found this helpful. And if so, let me know, share it with a friend. I always love hearing what comes up for you when I share something, because when you share with me, then that opens up more in me as well. So I'm wishing you a wonderful Friday. I hope you have a really lovely weekend, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.